Né?
Perfeito.
Então, vamos lá. Então, vou mudar para inglês aqui. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bianca. I'm a PhD in accounting by University of São Paulo, and currently I'm a lecturer at Fundação Getúlio Vargas here in São Paulo as well. It's a pleasure to be the mediator for this section. The paper that we are going to discuss today is called The Effects of Financial Constraints on the Market Value of Cash in a Mandatory Dividend Context. The co-authors are Marcelo Moraes, Avner Manuel, and Juliano Araújo. So I do know that Marcelo is going to present it to us. So Marcelo, you are granted 20 minutes to do so. So the floor is yours, all right?
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for your audience. I'm going to present this paper. It's about one of research I did with Avner and Juliano. Both were our PhD students. Now they are PhD in accounting. And let's go. We have a lot of talk about this paper. So if you consider cash holdings, this is a large portion of firms' assets. In the recent years, this cash holdings has been increasing, and the financial crisis, especially COVID-19, it's become more intensive in cash decisions. So we have the need to define the determinants for firms to survive in this period. I think that the pandemic environment make us to give more, I don't know, a little bit of this subject become more interesting. So the objective of this paper is shed some light in the effects of financial constraints on the value that shareholders place on a dollar cash. So we try to measure how much $1 cash is valuated by investors, by shareholders, and how this is related with dividends that in Brazilian context, it's mandatory. So we have imperfect capital markets, and emerging markets like Brazil have restrictions to access lines of credit. So we have to work with their own, the firms have to work with their own credit and their own cash to manage their needs. We have financial constraints, especially in emerging markets, and these market imperfections make this constraint a bigger problem than developed markets. So we have a mandatory contest in Brazil that our corporate law specifically determines 25% of the profits to be paid in dividends. These mandatory dividends make our case interesting in why Brazil could be explored. So the relevance of this research is understand how this cash management can be used to assess the impact of financial constraints. I think that there's a puzzle or a context of mandatory dividends, and the literature provides us some evidence that these financial constraints and the dividend context may affect the value of cash for shareholders. So our hypothesis is that cash is an important tool for firms operating, and we have a market value of cash. This market value of cash, it's the meaning of which projects the firm will apply this cash. So we have positive NPV projects, the net present value, and negative projects. In a context of imperfection and cash constraints and credit constraints, we have the use of cash in negative NPV projects. And this could be better for the manager, but worse for the profits. So this extra dollar can be valued by the shareholders in this imperfect context. And there's a lot of tests, I'm sorry. I thought that we'd have half hour to present. So we need to.
But if you feel that you will need some more time, Marcelo, that's no problem whatsoever. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we need to expect this additional dollar of cash will be higher for constrained firms, since that this extra cash will be invested in the best way. So our hypothesis is ceteris paribus, shareholder place a higher market value on the cash holders of financial constrained firms than on the cash of financially unconstrained companies or firms. So we used a sample of Brazilian non-financial companies. In fact, it's non-financial and utility companies we cut off of our sample. We used Economatica database, and the time frame was between 2000 and 2019. Our sample was about 292 Brazilian firms, about 2,500 firms, familiar observations. Our financial constraints criteria was size. So bigger companies have a lower constraints, and payout ratio. So firms would have a payout ratio as a lower constraint firms. Okay, and we cut it in the top 30%, the 30 percentile of the companies to be constrained. So we use a model with adaptation of Pinkovitz and Williamson. So we used this constraint criteria, growth opportunities, dividend context, and interactions between investment and dividends and cash to analyze our results. So the coefficient beta 14, it's about the interaction of the dividend and cash. It's our interest variable. We expected that this coefficient will be higher for financially constrained companies, indicate that cash holdings are more valuable for them. So we use this estimation, use firms and years fixed assets. About 8.88% of our companies have their total assets in cash and equivalents. We have firms classified as financial constrained in 6.74 low dividend firms, and unconstrained, it's about 10.32 dividend. And smaller companies have an average similar to large ones. It's about 8.31 and 8.11%. So these are our results. We have our using the size criteria. We didn't have any significant variable in the interaction between dividend and cash, but using the payout ratio, we have the constrained firms have a positive effect of the value of cash. So these firms constrained, financial constrained firms with a cash, extra cash dollar with dividend, with payment of dividend, they have a value of 97 cents of the market for each $1. So the market believe that these companies will use their own cash in a better way than unconstrained firms. So they will need the extra, they would need this cash. So the market, the shareholders value this cash in an extra way, okay? But in the size criteria, we saw that the cash levels are quite similar between the large and small companies. So we can see that the Painaway table 2, that our coefficient that change overall is $0.50. So we have that the dollar it's valuable for shareholders in about 50% of their own value. And when we saw constrained firms, we know that this value is much more for the shareholders. So there's a difference about 45, 46 cents by any extra dollar. So this difference is statistically significant at a 5% level. And we can see that the coefficient will be statistically significant, and we can validate our hypothesis. Our findings indicate that the annual payout ratio criteria is relevant for this factor of market value of cash. In other hands, we don't have a constrained firms using size criteria. I believe that we don't have much more variance between firms in Brazil in B3 in stock market. Most of them they already are big company. Even when we call it smaller, the smaller ones are large firms. So the size criteria doesn't fit very well for Brazilian case. So our findings partially support our research hypothesis, specifically when we use the payout ratio as a constraint criteria. As a robustness test, we did the same, use the firm value with OLS and industry fixed effects. And basically, we found the same results. So we have a higher value for firms that pay dividends than non-dividend payers. When you use the value of the market value of the company as a financial financial restriction criteria, okay? So this is a interest for our research. We use Brazil because our legislation about the mandatory dividends, and as I mentioned before, the size criteria is not a good profit for financial constraint. Concluding our results indicate that these mandatory dividends, in fact, influence the value that shareholders attribute to cash in Brazil. This higher value of cash for firms that pay dividends, it's more reliable as a financial constraint. And we show that the use of mandatory rules of dividends can influence this, the value of the investors' attribute to cash reserve to cash holdings. So this is a relevant and an interesting analysis for other countries. Most of the countries, international and developed countries, doesn't have a legislation of mandatory dividend. And that's all. I think that I was worried about time, and so I'm open to questions, and thank you, Bianca, once again.
My pleasure, Marcelo. Thank you for your presentation. Would you mind if I share my screen to show you some of my comments? Okay, so there it is. Okay, so first of all, I would like to congratulate you and your co-authors about the paper. It was very pleasant to read, and surely I learned a lot about the theme, in the sense that thinking about how the financial constraints in the Brazilian setting is something that is not quite understood by the market participants, okay, in a sense of having the market value impacting, actually being impacted by the cash holdings, right? So just as a quick reminder of what you have already presented, you said that your goal was to shed light on the effects of financial constraints on the value that shareholders place on a dollar of cash in an emerging economy where companies are obligated by law to distribute a fraction of their profits, okay? Here I would include Brazil in brackets, let's say, in parentheses, just to make sure that you have the emerging country already in your goal. Also, you got attention considering the institutional setting, so your paper is based on that. So the first one, it would be the impact that you saw on the amount of cash holdings versus the firm value in an emerging market. And the second one would be the role of mandatory dividends and financial constraints. And for that, you mainly have a GLM fixed effect model with year controls and error robust to heteroscedasticity. And also you have the OLS regression that you have controlled for the firm level, okay? Your sample was 292 Brazilian public non-financial companies from the 2000 year to the 2019. And your database was from Economatica, right? So my main comments here, they're obviously focusing on to have improvements on your paper. As I have already previously said to you, I really enjoyed reading that. It was well written. The topic is really interesting. So all the comments here are aiming to improve that, right? So mostly my comments, they are more of questions. So some things that I would like to see. I do know that the conference has a limit of pages, so this is quite tricky to have all the information in a small space. But even so, I would like to ask you that, all right? So I missed the part that you would say how many companies would have you would have in your sample period, all right? So would you mind explaining to me the sample selection? So you said that you excluded the utilities companies and also the financial companies. So what happened to the other companies that are, well, not from that sectors? Okay.
I think that we had about 320 companies, no, 350 companies. And basically we excluded financial companies and utilities. I think that most of them was the usual uh, the usual
Criterion, right? I think was
yeah, yeah,
liquidity.
yeah.
Then okay.
You have very different um, operation systems for utility companies and for financial companies. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, we cut off this explanation because of the size, the limit of pages on the paper, but basically it's because of the operation of these companies. And
Mm-hmm.
what? Okay, you can ask. Sorry.
No, it was just like I would suggest you to include that you had as the population for your study
Yeah,
around 350 companies. From
yeah,
those, you had the difference would be only the financial and utility companies, because I was wondering, I do know that we have around 400 companies in the Brazilian market, and I I do know that now the difference between the 400 and something companies and the 292 companies that you got, they're all utilities and financial companies. So that's
yeah,
was my
yeah.
main concern.
We because of the timeline of the sample was about 19 years, we
Mm-hmm.
set up a minimum number of years in the sample. So
Okay.
some companies was off because of this too. Uh,
Okay, so I think
we
it would be
have
great to
a
include that.
very good table that put on the whole sample and
Mm-hmm.
all the cuts to the final sample. But I know this is very important.
Mm-hmm. No, great. So if you have the table, even better, so you can include for the final version of the paper.
Yeah,
And another thing that I was really curious about is why didn't you include other emerging markets when you were developing your analysis? Because I would be very interested in seeing the effects, let's say, for an emerging market that does not have mandatory dividends. So to see how it would react. So having kind of a comparison. I do know that this is going to change quite in a significant manner how you have structured your paper, but this was something that I was really interested in seeing, you know. So I don't know,
yeah.
how do you feel about it?
Uh, we thought about include the other emerging markets, but if you we use it in other countries and these countries didn't have these mandatory contests for payout rules,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we could find that the financial constraint could be a factor to different value of the market value of cash, but we didn't know how about the interaction between the payout ratio with the cash value. So this interaction variable wouldn't be available for us. So was a methodological choice of us
Mm-hmm.
to set the sample only in Brazil. But I agree with you that we need to explain this a little bit better to understand why not other countries. Even though we can say just, oh, we have this BRICS context
Mm-hmm.
or another bigger sample of emerging markets, and why didn't fit on this research?
Mm-hmm. It's something that is going to just give you an extra flavor for your paper, because I do understand that the Brazilian setting is really interesting. I agree completely with you, but it's something to sell to the editors
Yeah,
for
I know, I know. This
international.
the first question always is why Brazil? So, oh, or why not other emerging countries? Yeah,
No, because
I know.
I do um, believe that you got something that is really interesting to explore, and then you could insert other information from other emerging markets, and I think it would be really interesting to see the results. And well, about your financial restraint measures, so thinking about your main regressions, you got two measures, right? You had the first one, which was the annual payout ratio. So my question was about the juros sobre capital próprio. So how have you considered that? And also the second one would be size, that you mentioned that you had the problem because, well, public companies in Brazil, they're not that small. They're not going to vary that much in terms of size. So another question that I got in this manner would be, uh, did those measures match when classifying a financially constrained company? So did you saw something that like saying, actually, did you see that, well, you got the annual payout ratio that got the financial restraint, but when you saw size, it wouldn't be. So when you had a mismatch, I don't know if you have searched for that in your database. So those would be my two first questions on the
Yeah.
financial restraint measure.
Um, I completely agree with you. The juros sobre capital próprio, it's our jabuticaba in the
Mm-hmm.
paper. It's hard to explain for someone that is not uh, a Brazilian person, or someone who really understands uh, Brazilian tax system.
Mm-hmm.
In
Even Brazilians
myself
don't
doesn't.
understand, right?
Yeah, I don't understand it. But we sum the juros sobre capital próprio with the payout ratio.
Okay.
Besides the tax problem of, yeah, one you pay tax and another one the person will receive pay, the payout ratio considered as one. Okay.
Okay, so I think you have
Uh,
to state that clearer in your. I do understand that you're focusing on an international audience, but it's interesting to note that if somebody is going to read that and you know how the Brazilian
yeah,
dividend
I think
system
that
works.
a footnote can explain it for
Yeah,
someone who needs to understand better.
yeah, exactly. And
Uh,
the another thing that I forgot what I was going to ask, so you can keep going, then I will remember. I'm sorry.
okay, no problem. I think that size is the most used financial constraint criteria,
Hmm.
and even Brazilian companies are too big, or they are too big for Brazil, but they are very small for the other countries. But they are quite similar in the size, especially when you cut off the financial companies,
Hmm.
because they are the really ones that are really big for Brazilian market.
Hmm.
So uh, we expected that it wasn't fit for Brazilian financial constraint criteria, but we have to use it because it's the most usually criteria for
Hmm.
each one of the studies before the previous literature use it. So you have to test. I
Okay.
think that we can discuss a little bit better this variability of the size measure,
Hmm.
but I didn't cut it off because I really believe that someone will say, oh, okay, but size he always use it, so
Hmm.
try it. Even though Brazilian companies are very similar, you have to test it. That's basically why we keep it.
No, that makes totally sense, and I do agree with you. The only thing that I was actually wondering is if your regressions should be the main ones, because your robustness check regressions, they were really interesting as well, because, well, you suggested a new proxy for the financial restraint, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that I don't know. I think you have to talk with your co-authors on how to sell that, but it's something that you can sell for. That's why I asked about the other emerging markets, because if it's something that you can validate for other markets as well, emerging ones, then you can suggest for the literature that you got a new proxy. So something that works better for emerging markets. And I remember what I was going to ask you. So about the juros sobre o capital próprio, I'm not quite, I don't know it very well, and I don't know how much companies pay of it. So was something that I was actually thinking right now, if a company will prefer to pay the CSCP regardless of the dividends. So I don't know. I do know they have a mandatory level. So if they're going to distribute the minimum level, they're probably, I don't know,
They
paying
didn't
both.
have a minimum, but they have a limit. The limit
Okay.
is the long-term income, the long-term interest rate multiplied by the equity of the firm.
So this is
So this is
the
the
limit for the
limit. So
juros.
it's basically if you are paying an interest rate of long term for your total equity for your shareholders. So this is the top limit.
So
Because long-term interest rate is very small in Brazil, uh, especially in the recent years, the JSCP, it's compared with payout, it's very small.
okay, so you would say that almost all companies from your sample would pay CSCP?
No,
No, right?
no.
Okay.
It's not I don't know the exactly proportion, but it's a smaller one. And the value of the GSCP is much more smaller than payout. But we sum everything and calculate the payout ratio.
No, no problem. It was something that I was just curious right now, so that's why the question. And about the a dummy that you got for your robustness check regressions that you said that you were following the companies that were paying or not paying dividends. So I was curious about the additional dividends. So uh, do you remember if there are many companies that would pay extra dividends to their investors in your sample?
We collected the total paid dividends. I believe that this additional dividend used proposed on the annual shareholders meeting. So I believe that the sum we collected it's the sum of all dividends.
Okay, because I was actually curious about seeing how the additional dividends they would have a role in your results. I don't know if it would
Yes.
be something as a signaling effect or if the company is not as financially constrained and then they pay more dividends to the shareholder or in the other way around as well. I don't know. So I think something that it's interesting to try to see how it works because companies they can pay extra dividends. So the ones that have more cash and they want to sign to the market that they are good, probably they're going to do that using dividends.
Yeah.
Okay. And so other comments would be about the market to book measure. So why did you use the market to book and not the market cap? Because, well, this is my personal view on that by reading other research. But if we're thinking about the market value of a company, so I do expect that the market is going to value the debt as well as, well, the other asset that we got in the firm. So thinking that the equity is the difference between debt and the assets that you got. So I do suppose that the market is going to value that in their computations. So why have you chosen that measure to be your dependent variable?
Okay. Market to book is a proxy that we can use it for almost everything. So in some ways, it reflects the potential of future value of the company because we have the relation between the market cap and the book value. Market cap only compares the total value, but is it doesn't have the sense of this future potential. So I think that market to book can aggregate more information for the model than market cap. Uh, I, I I can understand that it's a choice. I can change between them, but by myself, I prefer market to book because we have a basic value of the book values to compare the market cap of the company.
Okay, so what I would suggest you then is to include a further explanation on that, on why
Okay.
have you chosen that variable, and just run an extra regression to see if the results are maintained with the
Okay.
market cap. Okay,
Mhm.
and I think it's my last main comment that I would have on your paper. So you argue by previous literature that many of the problems, well, basically the results that you got is because we are seeing results in an emerging market, that we have some problems in terms of corporate governance, so protecting the investors in that sense, right? So that's why they would prefer financially constrained firms, because they're going to allocate the resources on projects with positive NPVs, right? So thinking about this corporate governance in Brazil and how it evolved during your period sample, so what is your opinion on that, on how it would affect or impact your results? So
Okay.
corporate governance in Brazil from the 2000 year is different from now, right?
I agree with you that we have an evolution of corporate governance in Brazil. It's about 20 years of sample.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the market structure, like what is important for corporate governance, for institutions, corporate law, and all the rules and laws about corporate governance, we didn't we didn't change too much in the 2 last decades. So I think that in a perception sense, in a perception of us, we can believe that corporate governance is getting more important for shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
The instruments to capture these perceptions, they didn't change it. We have the same corporate governance rules on stock market. We have the same laws. We have the signing of B3 exchange this year about to change their corporate governance rules for ESG. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that now we are changing our structure, but in this sample, we didn't have any major change to affect the results.
Mm-hmm. So I think what you can then tell briefly in your paper, so in the final version of it, is argue by that side. So explain a little bit better about the corporate governance in Brazil through. I do know that an international audience will expect that emerging markets are going to have less of a corporate governance level as developed economies. But I
Yeah,
think you could just highlight those points, saying why Brazil is interesting when you're addressing the topic. Okay,
yeah, thank you.
you're welcome, and glad that I can help. So other suggestions, there are minor ones, I think. So the title I would include cash holdings. I think it was lacking something. I think it sounds better if you say market value of cash holdings. So it sounds better. Try to make your introduction a little bit more concise, because you bring a lot of your results on the introduction. So I think you can just summarize it a little bit more. I think you can sell better your contributions. So, for instance, you got a new proxy for dividends as a financial constraint. So, dividends would be a new proxy for financial constraint. So, I think you can sell that better. And sometimes you compare the results that you got in Falkender and Wang, but they have a different time, actually a period sample than yours. So I don't know how you could match it, or even try to search for papers that had updated their sample, okay?
Okay,
So something in this manner, okay? But besides that, I would like to congratulate you and your co-authors. It was a really good paper to read, and wish you best of luck in the publication, okay?
thank you very much. Uh, if may I ask you, can you send me this your
Yeah,
presentation?
of course. So can you send me your mail on the chat? Then I can send you
Okay,
right away. Okay.
perfect.
So I would now open for the audience questions. So there's anyone that would like to ask a question to Marcelo? You can write, even in Portuguese, there's no problem. Like I can ask in English. And if you prefer speaking, that's okay as well. Feel free to do whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Please, guys, don't be shy.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can still chat a little bit more, Marcelo. So some question, actually a question that I really enjoy asking to presenters would be, how did you got the idea to write this paper? Because it's a really important question for other people that are like getting to know the academic area and so on. So if you can answer that question, I would be pleased.
Okay. I've been studying holding problem for the last 10 years.
Mhm.
And Avner was my master's and then PhD student for the last 6 years. And on his PhD thesis, he worked with financial constraints in cash holdings. And when we were finished his work, we thought about this mandatory context of Brazilian payout. So we think that, oh, okay, we found that corporate governance will help companies to have a higher level of cash. So how the market saw that? So we bring the idea of market value of cash holdings. And then, okay, the shareholders put some value or perceive some value of cash. So how the dividend context will change it? And then we can try to test these hypotheses analyzing this context, because it's something very specific for Brazil. We always say, oh, okay, Brazil is not a very good setting for international publishers or international journals. We have to explore what we have different. And I think that this dividend corporate law rules, it's something that we explored in other ways, but never before in this cash holding. So I think that the idea could fit, and we were very lucky to found it.
Mm-hmm. It was great. Like, congratulations again. And it's really interesting to see how is the research process, right? So as you said, like you have been studying the topic for 10 years right now. So by studying continuously, then new ideas are coming. And also by being advisor to other people, right? Because they have fresh ideas that help us to see the problem that we were studying in different angles, right?
Exactly.
Okay, great. So I think we don't have additional questions. We do have a comment here congratulating you and your co-authors, Marcelo. So once again, congratulations. Well, then I think we can end our session for today. So once again, I would like to thank your for your presentation, Marcelo, and also congratulations again for your paper. If I can be of any assistance, please let me know. I will send you my PowerPoint slides for you. And that's it, guys. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to mediate this session.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone who is attending. And see you guys. Hope to find you in another sessions.
Yeah.
And I'm very helpful that the next year we'll find you in person.
Yeah, me too. Hopefully, we are going to meet
Yeah.
again on the coffee breaks.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Thank
Okay,
you
thank you
again.
guys.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.